You all familiar with the terms and words like radical extremism and terrorism. It doesn't matter whether you live in Asia, Africa, Europe or America. We come across with these terms and words like radical extremism and terrorism while reading newspaper, blog or watching some news channel. In Europe and America, these terrorists who are targeting the innocent civilians in subways, bars and clubs or airports with the purpose of causing maximum damage, when they ask the reason what motivated them to take such horrific steps, these are ordinary people with families and children whom you are targeting. Then their reason fall in any of those categories like fall of Europe, defeat of Western morality, modernity, sinful lifestyle, haram, or it could be some socio-economic factor, or foreign policy and international issues like drone attack, Palestine, Iraq, or Afghan war. The interesting thing is, the terrorists who are committing terrorist activities in Europe and America are the second generation Muslim born, whose parents were immigrated to Europe and America in the 70s, 80s or 90s. And they were brought up in the westernized culture. Any non-Western person like myself think that they are supposed to be modern and educated or civilized. But no, they are also ended up blowing themselves up along with killing many innocent civilians. On the other hand, the terrorists who are committing terrorist activities in the Muslim countries, their reason for killing fellow Muslim is because they are not Muslim enough to join their cause against westernization. Ever since the 9/11, the whole war on terror is not confined to some countries only. Almost all the countries of the world are affected by it one way or the other, which, as a matter of fact, doesn't seem to come to an end in the near foreseeable future. It's been more than 15 years of this war. Either 9/11 was just a triggering point, which later on resulted in US invasion of Afghanistan, then Iraq, or was it something else? Even though 15 of the 19 hijackers were Saudis, but Iraq was targeted. Despite the fact there were anti-war rallies in Europe and America, millions of people protested against the Iraq war. Saddam Hussein, US long-standing ally, who had a long history of having US support, was targeted. Countries like France, Germany, New Zealand were also against the war because they were convinced that Iraq was not carrying the weapons of mass destruction that could jeopardize the world peace. But there were significant reports that Saddam was using the chemical weapons against Iranian, Kurdish and his own people. If US had not invaded Iraq, which means no ISIS. Because Saddam's fall created a great vacuum and it was filled by Al-Qaeda to gain a foothold in Iraq, which later on resulted in the creation of ISIS. The common people who protested against the war back in 2002 and 3, now the same working class, ordinary working class people are being targeted by the newly radicalized terrorist group, which justifies that this war was right from the beginning by the government and authoritative point of view. It also provides an excuse to the radical group to further propagate their agenda, that they are and have been the victims from the start. Now is time to do something against westernization. Okay, that's just politics. At an individual level, this war has created a perception of bias, distrust, fear among people. It's not only from the security point of view. The important thing is, this war has changed the whole perspective of the world, and it is now shaping the minds of people in a certain way, of not believing and accepting others, sticking it to one's belief. It doesn't matter whether it's right or wrong. One is always on the verge of choosing between two sides. The middle ground is almost gone, and the people on the middle ground are being targeted from both sides. Although 9/11 was just a triggering point because it happened on US soil at a massive scale from an outside organizations. But the war was already underway because the terrorist attacks were happening even before 9/11. For instance, in 1982 to 1986, 36 suicide attacks were directed against Americans, French and Israeli forces, killed 659 people. In 1983, Beirut Iraq bombing by Islamic militant jihadist organization killed 241 US and 58 French peacemakers. In 1985, Air India Flight 182 was blown up by a bomb in the Irish space, killing 329 people. It was by a Babur Khalistan militant group based in Canada to punish India for attacking the Golden Temple. In December 21, 1988, Pan American World Airways Flight 103 was targeted and destroyed by Libyan Abdul Basit al-Maghrahi over the Scottish town of Lockerbie, killing 217 people. In 1993, the attack on World Trade Center fortunately missed the target, which was originally supposed to kill tens of thousands of people. It failed and killed only 6 people and injured over 1,000. In February 25, 1994, Bruce Goldstein, an American-born Israeli physician who shot and killed between 30 to 54 Muslim worshippers inside the Ibrahimi Mosque. Afterwards, an Israeli political party praised Goldstein's actions. Israel declared Kurds outlawed. Nowadays, it is considered a terrorist organization by Israel, Canada, European Union, and US. In August 7, 1998, individuals associated with Al-Qaeda carried out simultaneous bombing at 2 US embassies in Africa, killing 224 people. In October 12, 2000, Al-Qaeda carried out another suicide bombing attack at a US Navy destroyer in the Yemeni port of Aden, killed 17 sailors. The point is, in the period of 80s and 90s, there were many Islamic militant jihadist organizations were established in the pursuit of religious and political goals. Most of them were actually drawing inspiration from the Iranian Khomeini's revolution of 1979. In other words, religion was being used and exploited to gain personal and political goals. At that point of the history, religion was not remained a personal matter anymore in the Islamic world. Al-Qaeda, however, was also established in 1988 by Osama bin Laden and closely advised by Ayman al-Zawahiri, an Egyptian Islamic Jihad leader, with the purpose of replacing the Western-controlled Muslim-dominated country with the Islamic fundamentalist jihadist regime. In his manifesto of 1996, Osama declared a violent jihad against US military force based in Saudi Arabia. Taliban and other terrorist organizations in the countries of subcontinent don't have a very long history. They were actually funded by the US in the 80s. To be more precise, Reagan administration was expanding the CIA's program of funding the Islamic militant jihadists in Afghanistan. According to the official sources, it was against terrorism in the wake of 1983's Beirut Brock bombing, which killed 241 US and 58 French peacemakers. According to the unofficial sources, Reagan administration was making it official in 1983 and hiding it under the false pretense of Beirut Brock bombing. As a matter of fact, US had already been supporting those Islamic militant jihadists in Afghanistan since late 70s, with the joint mission of CIA and ISI to fight against Soviet Union and push Russians out of the region. There are many angles and versions to this story, and one of them there, in the late 70s, Pakistani Prime Minister Zulfikar Ali Bhutto was more inclined towards Soviet Union. For instance, his nationalistic policies, arms deals with Russia, and land reforms. Many Pakistani historians also claim that it was US in the background overthrowing Bhutto's government and bringing a radical dictator into power. But there is no proof to support this theory. But US continued supporting that radical dictatorial regime for around about 10 or 11 years. Anyways, that's what happened before 9/11. After 9/11, in less than 24 hours, UN, United Nations, invoked the Article 5th of North Atlantic Treaty to take broad range of measures against terrorism.
On September the 12th, the North Atlantic Council met again. in response to the appalling attacks perpetrated yesterday against the United States of America. The Council agreed that if it is determined that this attack was directed from abroad against the United States, it shall be regarded as an action covered by Article 5 of the Washington Treaty, which states that an armed attack against one or more of the Allies in Europe or in North America shall be considered an attack against them all. The commitment to collective self-defense.
In September 20, 2001, US President George W. Bush delivered an ultimatum to the Taliban government in Afghanistan, either to turn over Osama and other Al-Qaeda's leaders to US or to face the consequences.
It is threatening people everywhere by sponsoring and sheltering and supplying terrorists. By aiding and abetting murder, the Taliban regime is committing murder. And tonight, the United States of America makes the following demands on the Taliban. Deliver to United States authorities all the leaders of Al-Qaeda who hide in your land. Release all foreign nationals, including American citizens you have unjustly imprisoned. Protect foreign journalists, diplomats, and aid workers in your country. Close immediately and permanently every terrorist training camp in Afghanistan, and hand over every terrorist and every person in their support structure to appropriate authorities. Give the United States full access to terrorist training camps so we can make sure they are no longer operating. These demands are not open to negotiation or discussion,
which the Taliban government in Afghanistan refused. However, in October 2001, US, UK and other coalition's allies invaded Afghanistan, and in less than 1 month, the capital of Afghanistan, Kabul, fell, and the remaining members of Taliban fell back into the rugged mountains of eastern Afghanistan. At that time, it was believed that Osama escaped into Pakistan, which remained uncertain until his death on May 1, 2011 in Abbottabad, Pakistan. The war and different operations continued over the years in Iraq, Afghanistan, Pakistan, and different parts of the world. After George W. Bush, Obama's administration changed the on-ground combat strategy from military to drones. Ever since 9/11, ISIS, Al-Qaeda, Taliban, and other terrorist organizations have executed several attacks in different parts of the world where there wasn't any conflict. For instance, 2002, Bali bombing in Indonesia, 2003, Istanbul bombing in Turkey, 2004, Madrid train bombing in Spain, July 7, 2005, London bombing in UK, 2007, Glasgow International Airport attack in UK, 2009, Fort Hood shooting in US, 2013, Renly bombing in Turkey, 2014, Canadian Parliament shooting in 2015, Corinthia Hotel bombing in Libya, 2015, Sanaa Mosque bombing in Yemen, 2015 Paris attacks, 2016 Brussels bombing. Whereas the countries like Pakistan have suffered hundreds of terrorist attacks for the past 10 years, which killed over 70,000 people, even though they have the same religion and culture, which proves one thing: religion is just a tactic or tool to gain political and territorial control. In other words, end justifies the means. Some people question that if there hadn't been US invasion of Iraq and Afghanistan, which means no ISIS and nothing. What about some other facts like decades-long policy of sectarianism by Gaddafi, Saddam, General Zia and other dictators in the Muslim countries, which we now call it extremism? What about the Taliban government in Afghanistan, that was sheltering Osama and other Al-Qaeda's leaders. The same Taliban who were willing to sacrifice their whole country instead of giving over Osama and other Al-Qaeda's leaders to US. And the same stubborn Taliban who executed hundreds of terrorist attacks in Pakistan for the last 10 years. Just give them legitimacy and power, then expecting good from them would be absolutely ridiculous. If one thinks the world would have been a peaceful place if there hadn't been US invasion of Iraq and Afghanistan or 9/11, I think their answer is nothing more than oversimplification, because the world would have been facing a different set of problems of more serious kind. It was just a matter of time. 9/11 would have been happening everywhere because those people have the legitimacy and power. Okay, that's just coulda, woulda, shoulda. The reality is the hate and contempt we see today against westernization in the Muslim countries, it was already there and had been gradually indoctrinated for the past 4 or 5 decades. Either it was inspired by the Iranian Khomeini's revolution of 1979, or dictatorial regime of Stalin and Hitler, or colonialism. It doesn't matter whatever it is, but the end game and purpose is same, and which is politicization of religion to gain control and apply it whatever you see fit and crush others. With my limited resources, research and experience, the thing I have learned and observed, the hate and contempt we see today on both sides against westernization and Islamophobia is cultivated through 3 basic ways. First, conspiracy theories. The reason conspiracy theories are very interesting and intriguing because they explain certain factors, but they do not tell the whole picture. Secondly, politics of blame game. Since there has been a great loss from both sides, more from the Muslim world, that's why they are more easily lured into the conspiracy theories and politics of blame game. And third, religion. When first and second doesn't work, religion factor usually works. Because through religion, the other culture, civilization and lifestyle is shown and proven guilty, which must be crushed and conquered. Just imagine how horrifying would that be when all 3 factors are applicable and accepted at the same time. If one believes in the conspiracy theories and politics of blame game, then religion is just a catalyst or a trigger bomb. Some people say that the whole war on terror is simply an economics, financed by the rich bankers to sell weapons, industrialization. But it doesn't explain the politics and the terrorist attacks before 9/11. Some also say that Osama was a CIA agent in the 80s. But there's no proof to support this theory. Some also say that when Taliban were fighting against Russians, they were freedom fighters. Now they are terrorists only because they are fighting against you. But it doesn't explain the hundreds of terrorist attacks by Taliban in Pakistan for the last 10 years. US is also equally responsible for killing many innocent civilians through drones attacks in the search of terrorists. On the other hand, there are mixed reactions and views have been observed over the years. For instance, Bush administration floated the term war on terror and kept using it for years. In April 2007, the British government publicly announced that it was abandoning the term war on terror as they found it to be less helpful.
We must be brave enough to admit that the war on terror is not working. We need a smarter way to reduce the threat from countries that nurture terrorists and generate terrorism.
It was later explained by Lady Eliza Manningham that 9/11 was a crime, not an act of war.
Made matters worse.
Our involvement in Iraq radicalised, for want of a better word, but a whole generation of young people, some of them British citizens, not a whole generation, a few among a generation, who were saw our involvement in Iraq on top of our involvement in Afghanistan as being an attack on Islam.
According to the then
And arguably, we gave Osama bin Laden his Iraqi jihad.
US President Barack Obama rarely used the term war on terror. He stated in his inaugural speech in January 2009 that our nation is at war against the far-reaching network of violence and hatred.
We are in the midst of crisis is now well understood. Our nation is at war against a far-reaching network of violence and hatred.
ISIS is currently expanding its territory by gaining spurs and allegiance from different terrorist organizations across the world. According to ISIS ideology, any Muslim who doesn't agree with ISIS is an apostate, and the punishment for an apostate is death. Now you can easily imagine what would they do if you're non-Muslim. The way violence and hatred is increasing, love, patience and tolerance of living together with harmony is diminishing. It's not only difficult but almost impossible to say, believe or distinguish what is right or wrong anymore. Since both sides have done horrific things to prove themselves right, sometimes I just wonder, is there going to be any end to this? Or it will end in everything? Agree, disagree, but your feedback is very important. Like, share and subscribe, and leave your feedback in the comment box below. I'll personally answer that. Thank you.